1945. Soviet soldiers climb down into the wet, moldering tunnels of an abandoned limestone quarry in the Ore Mountains, 36 meters below the surface. They are looking for the missing paintings of the Dresden Gallery, crates of European masterpieces hidden from the war and now claimed by the victors. In one of those crates is a quiet Dutch painting of a young woman reading a letter by an open window. For nearly 2.5 centuries, critics would admire the bare wall behind her, as if its emptiness were Vermeer's final decision. But the wall was never empty. Right now, under a thick coat of paint, there is a naked god of love watching the whole scene. And that is only the first thing this picture is hiding. Start with the room itself. A young woman stands in profile, dressed in a bright yellow satin jacket trimmed with black, a blue skirt falling below it. Both hands hold a letter close to her face. To her left, a window stands open, and in the glass there is a pale reflection of her own features. Between her and us sits a table covered in a heavy, rumpled carpet, and on that carpet a white porcelain bowl has tipped over, spilling apples and peaches across the fabric. On the right, a heavy green curtain hangs from a metal rod, pulled back just enough to let us see in. And behind her, on a wall that generations of viewers swore was left bare on purpose, there now hangs a painting in a black frame. A nude Cupid, bow in hand, staring out from a painting inside the painting. The first fracture is in the glass. That reflection of her face is not a faithful mirror. It's grayer, heavier, older somehow, as though the window is showing us a version of her that has already been through something the woman herself hasn't caught up to yet. Get close enough to the original, and you'll notice tiny points of light scattered across the fruit and the carpet, a stippling technique Vermeer picked up from watching the soft, blurred highlights a camera obscura throws onto a wall. And in the deepest shadow, tucked into the lower right corner, beneath the folds of that green curtain, there's a base, a small, curved base of glass, quietly waiting under paint that was never supposed to be there. We'll come back to that base. It won't solve the painting by itself, but it will show us something more intimate. Vermeer changed his mind here more than once. For close to 250 years, that wall behind her was treated as a masterstroke. Critics praised the emptiness as a stroke of genius decades ahead of its time, a minimalist gesture built to keep the viewer's eye locked on the woman's inner life rather than on decoration. It's a clean story. Laboratory work carried out between 2017 and 2021 found otherwise. The layer covering that wall was applied by somebody else, decades after Vermeer himself was gone. Someone reached into this painting long after its creator could object and erased a god. To understand why anyone would go looking for a hidden lover behind a domestic scene like this one, we need to go back to the man who painted it. In the years around 1657, Johannes Vermeer was 25 years old and standing at a fork in his own career. He had been trained to paint grand historical and biblical scenes, the kind meant to earn a young artist prestige. Then, abruptly, he turned towards something smaller. Single figures caught mid-gesture in ordinary rooms. That shift lined up almost exactly with the moment a wealthy Delft investor named Peter van Roven began buying his work, giving Vermeer something rare for an artist his age, a measure of financial stability. There was tension underneath that stability, though. Vermeer had married into a Catholic family from a Calvinist background, and his mother-in-law, Maria Thins, had initially fought the marriage hard, unhappy about both the religious gap and the young painter's shaky finances. It is tempting to read those controlled interiors as a kind of answer to the household he had entered. Catholic, watchful, financially stronger than he was, and not entirely convinced by him. There's a darker backdrop, too. Just 3 years earlier, in 1654, a gunpowder store in Delft exploded, an event locals called the Delft Thunderclap. It tore through part of the city, and among its casualties, took the life of the gifted young painter, Karel Fabricius, whose stripped-back, luminous interiors clearly influenced Vermeer's own direction. A man who had just watched his city catch fire chose again and again to paint rooms of near total stillness. That's not decoration. That looks like a man building a shelter out of paint. Vermeer likely converted to Catholicism in secret before his wedding, and appears to have lived close to Jesuit circles in Delft, circles deeply interested in optics as a way of thinking about divine light. Recent Vermeer scholarship has pushed this connection further, arguing that the Jesuit world around him did not treat optics as a neutral trick, but as a way of approaching revelation itself. If that is right, then the glittering dots of light on the fruit and fabric are not just technical fireworks borrowed from a lens. They belong to a larger culture of seeing, one where light was never just light. The table looks domestic, but it is not innocent. The carpet is Anatolian, expensive, the kind of textile that only entered Dutch homes because of a trading empire stretching from Turkey to the Indies. The bowl is in the Wan Li style, imported by the Dutch East India Company, which by the 1650s was flooding Dutch households with Chinese porcelain for the first time. The fruit has already fallen, apples carrying the old echo of the fall, peaches traditionally linked to Venus, the whole arrangement tipped into instability rather than gathered and calm. Before we even read the letter, the room is telling us that something private has been disturbed by forces much larger than the girl herself. The curtain is not scenery. Practically, curtains like this hung in Dutch homes to protect expensive pigments from sunlight and hearth smoke. Here, it turns us into voyeurs, inviting us to peek into someone's private moment as though we've just pulled the fabric aside ourselves. And there's a sly art-historical joke folded into it. The illusionistic drape echoes an old story from Pliny the Elder about two painters competing to outdo each other, one of whom painted a curtain so convincing his rival tried to physically pull it back. Vermeer is playing that same trick on us centuries later, and most viewers walk past it without ever noticing they've been fooled. In that same deep shadow beneath the fruit bowl, conservators found a tiny purple highlight made from pure natural ultramarine, one of the most expensive pigments available to a 17th century painter, ground from lapis lazuli shipped in from Afghanistan through Venice. Spending that kind of pigment on a detail meant to stay invisible is close to irrational. Why bury real money in a shadow nobody was ever meant to find? The technical record tells us what happened. It does not tell us why. Long before anyone knew about the hidden Cupid, another quiet myth attached itself to this painting, that it was simply a portrait of loneliness, a woman waiting patiently for someone at sea. Officially, that's how it was explained for generations. But that reading depends entirely on the wall staying blank, and the wall was never supposed to be blank. Infrared scanning showed Vermeer had originally posed the woman differently, turned more toward the window, her back partly to us. He reworked her into the strict profile we see now, a change that makes her feel almost like a carved medallion, still and formal. That is the kind of revision an artist makes when a picture is still fighting him. In 2017, a macro X-ray fluorescence scan, carried out with support from the Rijksmuseum, found something larger waiting in the lower right corner. A tall glass wine vessel, a Vermeer, standing roughly 18 centimeters high, decorated with a grapevine pattern, the level of wine inside it clearly rendered. Vermeer painted this glass in careful detail, and then he buried it, covering it completely with the green curtain, leaving only that curved base as a trace of what used to be there. Only later do you notice what Cupid's foot is pressing down on: two discarded theatrical masks. The image comes almost directly from a book of emblems published by Otto van Veen in Antwerp in 1608, illustrating the idea that honest love defeats hypocrisy. And that detail changes the whole letter. Cupid also holds a card marked with the Roman numeral for 1, a reference to an emblem meaning that perfect love allows for only a single partner. Put a pagan god of fidelity directly behind a woman absorbed in a letter, and the room stops being a picture of patient domestic waiting. It becomes something closer to a verdict chamber. This is where the painting becomes dangerous, because the Cupid isn't hidden by time or fading varnish. Laboratory analysis found an actual layer of grime built up over decades, sitting between Vermeer's original varnish and the paint that covers the god of love. That layer of dirt is a clock. It proves someone painted over the Cupid long after Vermeer's own hand had left the canvas, sometime in the early 1700s, before the picture entered the Saxon royal collection in 1742. The archive goes silent on who did it and why. One version says a later owner found a naked pagan god improper for a respectable parlor. Another says an art dealer wanted the painting to resemble the work of Rembrandt, whose pictures, with their dark, empty backgrounds, sold for vastly more money at the time. Either way, somebody made a calculated decision to erase meaning from another man's work and got away with it for roughly 250 years, tossed in almost as an afterthought when a Saxon agent named Samuel de Bray purchased a batch of 30 paintings from a French prince in 1742, at a moment when this particular canvas was misidentified as minor work in the style of Rembrandt. A masterpiece, handed over for free because nobody in the room realized what they were holding. Then the still life stops being decorative and starts being an argument. The official reading, defended by scholars including Arthur Wheelock and Ute Neidhart, holds that this is a sincere love letter, with Cupid standing guard over a faithful relationship. But the researcher John Michael Montius and later independent analysts have pushed a harder version. Look at her lowered eyes. Look at that grayish, unsettled reflection in the glass. Look at the fruit, spilled rather than gathered. In this reading, the letter is not a promise. It is evidence. It may not be a love letter arriving safely. It may be the moment love fails, and Cupid isn't blessing the romance so much as presiding over a broken vow. The number 1 on his card, less a guarantee than an accusation aimed at whoever wrote those words. Some things about this canvas refuse to resolve, no matter how long researchers study them. Nobody can say with certainty why Vermeer buried that wine glass under the curtain after painting it in such loving detail. Perhaps he wanted to strip the scene of anything resembling a drinking bout. pushing the mood toward pure psychological tension instead of a flirtation over wine. Or perhaps that glass was simply left over from an earlier, abandoned version of the composition on the same canvas, a trace of a different painting he chose to bury rather than finish. This is where interpretation begins, not where it ends. And that distorted reflection, geometrically wrong for the angle of the window, resists a clean explanation too. Some historians think Vermeer wasn't painting what the glass would physically show, but what was happening underneath the woman's arranged calm. Her true face, not her public one. The museum's case is strong. The material evidence points to a later hand, and on that basis, conservators in Dresden made the decision to remove the overpaint between 2017 and 2021. But not everyone accepted the consequence of that evidence. Hungarian conservator Gyula Kameny argued that restoring the Cupid may have solved one problem while creating another, recovering an earlier layer of the picture, but losing the hush that generations of viewers had understood as Vermeer's own. Kameny pointed out that the grime beneath the overpaint could plausibly have built up in just a handful of years from candle smoke and wood fires in a 17th century home, and suggested Vermeer himself may have toned down his own Cupid with a warm varnish, chasing the same disciplined emptiness he would later perfect in The Milkmaid. If Kameny is right, the very restoration celebrated as a triumph in Dresden's 2021 exhibition did not recover Vermeer's intention so much as replace it. Trading a deliberate hush for a busier picture the artist may never have wanted anyone to see. That argument hasn't been settled, and it may never be. Whatever the truth of that dispute, this canvas has lived a life stranger than most paintings ever do. It crossed borders once as an afterthought, tucked into a deal for 30 other pictures. It survived those flooded limestone tunnels near Lengefeld, 36 meters underground, in conditions humid enough that conservators today still call its survival close to miraculous. It was carried off as a war trophy, spent a decade in the Soviet Union, and was only returned to Dresden in 1955, an act framed at the time as an exchange of goodwill between governments that had just fought each other to the edge of ruin. Step back far enough, and this whole painting becomes an argument about masks and honesty that has nothing to do with the 17th century at all. The window shows us a face that isn't quite true. The curtain hides a glass that once existed and was written out of the record. The overpaint hid a god for 250 years. And the woman herself, letter pressed to her face, is doing the most human thing imaginable. Holding a controlled, composed posture, while something private and unresolved moves underneath it, with Cupid standing over her shoulder, one foot already pressing down on the masks of pretense. Maybe that's the real subject here. Not a specific love affair at all, but the effort every one of us makes to look steadier than we actually are in the moment something breaks us open. We will never know the exact words on that letter. Vermeer left us her hands, her posture, her lowered eyes, and nothing else. No text, no signature, no confirmation of grief or joy. Whoever wrote to her, and whatever they said, stays sealed inside a moment that has now lasted more than 3.5 centuries. So sit with this. If Cupid is the witness for true love, standing there specifically to guard against deception, then why does Vermeer paint the woman as if the verdict has already reached her?